All right. Well, since we're at 10:30, we're going to go ahead and get started. Since we got a lot of folks here, and it's a fine Reformation Day Sunday. That was a fantastic service. Yeah. Thank you to the choir and musicians. Just a beautiful Sunday. I want to thank you for being here this morning for this conversation on Christian nationalism. I'm by no means an expert. And this is going to be an intro conversation. I'll give up the beginning and say we're already going to have a follow-up conversation to this coming up in November at Verona campus, where a member of the Wisconsin Council of Churches, who's done a little bit more study reading about this, is going to lead us in kind of a 102 conversation on that. So that's coming up in November. But today, it's going to be the start of a conversation. What do we know? What is Christian nationalism? How can we define it? Is it even possible to define it? Some are not so sure. Can it even be defined, or is it a little bit hard to define? We're going to look at some of the responses to Christian nationalism. Specifically, we're going to watch a short video from our bishop, Bishop Eaton. We're going to talk about what it means to define our own beliefs and theology in light of Christian nationalism or other theologies that we encounter in the world. We're also going to talk about connecting across difference. How do we engage? It's just an entire segment of Christians and fellow Americans that we can just write off and disconnect from? Or is there a path to further engagement and connection and hope for something beyond divide? And we'll have a little time for questions, and we're also going to have time for discussions around the table. And lastly, just talking about follow-up for what's next. But anytime when we go into a kind of contentious, possibly difficult topic or connecting across difference, I don't want to presume everybody in this room believes the same thing. In fact, I know everybody in this room does not believe the same thing about every topic or even every top thing we're going to talk about today. So just as a kind of framework for respectful conversations in general, there's this acronym that comes from the Kaleidoscope Institute. So R, take responsibility for what you say and feel without blaming others. E, use empathetic listening. S, be sensitive to differences in communication styles. P, ponder what you hear and feel before you speak. E, examine your own assumptions and perceptions. C, keep confidentiality. T, trust ambiguity, because we are not here to debate who is right or wrong. There'll be a quiz at the end for you guys to complete this afternoon. If you want to write it on your arm, you can do that as well. Before we start, though, it's interesting. Today's gospel reading, we did, it's Reformation Sunday, so there's two choices. There's Reformation Sunday, but there's also another reading appointed just for the church calendar. And today's gospel reading for what was the 20th Sunday after Pentecost actually comes from Luke 18, 9-14. I just want to read that for us by way of entering into this conversation today. It's the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, if you know this one. To some who were confident of their own righteousness, let me go back again. To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give a tenth of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. I thought that was a pretty incredible timing for a conversation like this to have a passage like that, because it's so easy when we think about those we disagree with strongly. Those whose views we know are very troubling, very challenging. It's so easy for us to take a certain posture, like the one we just heard about. Thank God I'm not like them. And not just that I'm not like them, thank God that I am so right and they are so wrong. And there's a way in which we can enter conversation with those we disagree with, starting from that place. But is there a way that we can enter with humility? Is there a way we can have this conversation with humility and recognize who we are at the foot of the cross? So that's by way of intro into this conversation. But this conversation finds us in an interesting moment, when there's a lot of fear in the air, when there's a lot of anger in the air, when new technologies are enabling communications that are kind of unfamiliar but allow information to travel a lot farther than expected, allow for movements to pop up and gain steam in ways they never had before, a way for new leaders to come out of nowhere and challenge assumed norms about long-held beliefs. Does any of this sound familiar? We are in such a moment again, and it's appropriate at Reformation Sunday that we're having this conversation about what seems like a very new movement, a very upsetting and troubling movement that came out of nowhere. But as we'll talk about a little bit today, some of this is very new and novel to our moment, but some of this is cyclical. We've been through this before. We've faced challenges before. We've faced difference in theology before. So it's not a new concept necessarily, but it's having the same conversation again in a different way. How do we equip ourselves? And part of that is talking about terms. Some of the Reformation was about things people have been familiar with, but it was going to bat and saying, what does this mean? That's Luther's famous rejoinder. What does this mean? And the small catechism, the large catechism are written in such a way that we get to the basics. What does this mean? And so, to start things off, how do we define Christian nationalism? Seems like a pretty simple question, right? The challenge is, Christian nationalism is not a denomination. It does not have a bishop. It does not have a formal structure. It does not have a doctrinal statement, a large, small catechism, a formula of concord like we have in our confessions. It doesn't exist in such a way. So therefore, there's not one representative source we can go to say for the definition. I will say we're going to look at a few different places that have attempted to define it. Some through empirical research, some from, again, just observation. But we'll start with our own denomination. That's from the ELCA Social Statement on Civic Life and Faith. And this is a crack at a definition of Christian nationalism. It reads that Christian nationalism is a cultural framework that idealizes and advocates fusion of certain Christian views with American civil life. This nationalistic ideology believes, among other things, that the U.S. Constitution was divinely inspired, that Christianity should be a privileged religion in the United States, and this nation holds a uniquely privileged status in God's eyes. Proponents range from those who believe the U.S. legally should be declared a Christian nation, to those involved in more virulent strains that are openly racist, patriarchal, or anti-democratic. Now, as we'll come back to a little bit as we kind of prod and poke at some of these definitions, some of these things taken on their own, we might not have, maybe some of us in the room might not have huge objections to some of these notions. We might read something that the U.S. Constitution was divinely inspired and say, yeah, we believe God was present in helping form this really important document at this important time in the nation's history. We might find ourselves being able to agree with that statement. It's where it goes next from there often that we may diverge, but we'll come back to that in a minute. First, I want to have our own Bishop Eaton share a little bit about, in her words, the ELCA's stance on Christian nationalism.
As Christians, we affirm that all people are created in God's image and deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And so as Christians, we reject harmful ideas. Sadly, we've seen an increased polarization among us, even in our church. This coincides with an alarming rise in hate speech and violence against religious and ethnic minorities in this country. There is a movement known as Christian Nationalism that is attempting to define what it means to be, quote, a real American. Christian nationalists would define a real American as white, Christian, and native-born. That idea is disturbing and cause for concern. Christian nationalists want to legislate that the United States is a Christian nation where Christianity should be privileged and only Christians should hold office. The movement seeks to link religious and political identities, often promoting racist, exclusionary, and divisive ideology. This idea is neither Christian nor patriotic. Patriotism means upholding our values of this country, such as liberty, justice, and equality, while also celebrating our diversity. That's what the United States motto means, in pluribus unum, out of many, one. It's ironic that the Puritans fled religious persecution, and their descendants shaped the First Amendment of the Constitution, which states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free expression thereof. There is no doubt that the majority of Americans identify as Christian, but that is different from declaring Christianity as the established religion. When Lutheran immigrants first came to this country in the 18th and 19th century, they weren't considered real Americans. They did not speak English or fit in with the deist, Calvinist religious minority. They were other and therefore suspect. German Lutheran immigrants weren't considered white. Neither were Irish, Italians, or Poles. Catholics and Jews were considered an alien threat. God knows I love my country. This beautiful, fragile, yet surprisingly resilient experiment in democracy and nationhood is not predicated on shared ethnicity. America is unique among nations. My grandfather, father, and uncles all served during World Wars I and II. I had the honor of placing a wreath on behalf of the ELCA at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington National Cemetery. I will not have my patriotism questioned. Christian nationalism is a perversion of the gospel and a threat to our democracy. It's precisely because I love my country that I warn against Christian nationalism. What binds us together is not ethnicity, but shared participation in our civic life, springing out of our cultural heritages and working for the common good. As Lutherans, it is our Christian calling to work together towards a more inclusive society. Be well, dear church.
How many had seen that statement before from Bishop Eden? Just a couple, yeah. It's a powerful statement. She brought in another dimension that wasn't, so much talked about, but the notion of ethnicity too, and that's one we'll talk about in a little bit, but that's another piece of it. It's not just about the religious beliefs or tenets, but it's also about ethnicity. But I want to talk about some other views because we have our stream of ELCA and that's how we respond to it, and that's, you saw Bishop Eaton in that response, but Christian nationalism is something that's impacting Christians throughout the country. So I wanted to bring some other voices in just to say, what is their take? What are they seeing? Can they define Christian nationalism? And so David French is a columnist for the New York Times. He comes from the evangelical community, but takes a lot of flack sometimes for being seen as one that kind of speaks against the evangelical community. But here's his take on Christian nationalism. He says, it is not Christian nationalism if a person's political values are shaped by the individual's Christian faith. In fact, many of America's most important social movements have been infused with Christian theology and Christian activism. The problem, though, is the belief that there should be Christian primacy in politics and law. And we'll talk about in a little bit, even within the Lutheran Church, how Luther's theology of two kingdoms has kind of been misattributed to make Christians feel as though there's no place for Christianity in politics and they should stay completely away. But there's another way that we can use our faith to engage fully for the better of our neighbor, not for power over, but to help all people flourish in our community. Another view from Mark Knoll. He's a historian. He's written quite a bit about the history of Christianity in America. And he says a little bit squishier of a definition. He says Christian nationalism is really not a sharply focused thing, but a series of loosely defined ideological positions. And this is from a larger podcast conversation. Again, if you put your name and email on the attendance things in the middle, I'm going to send out a link after this conversation with resources because there's a wealth of podcasts, videos, books, and conversations if you want to engage deeper in any of this we talk about today. There's an organization that was founded by the National Baptist or American Baptist Church called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And this is from their website, as succinct a definition as they could get about what Christian nationalism is. And they define it as a political ideology that seeks to merge Christian and American identities, distorting both the Christian faith and America's constitutional democracy, so that basically blending them so close together that they are one and the same. That to be American is Christian, to be Christian is to be American, and that is the definition. So again, it's something about religion, something about identity, something about ethnicity. Everybody's coming out a little bit, but we're hearing some overlap and some things there. Now, Andrew Whitehead is regarded as one of the kind of foremost thinkers, foremost scholars in the last few years who's really delved into this topic of Christian nationalism. He's talked a little bit about it here. I'm sorry, there's a lot of quotes as we're diving in, but he says that it's a cultural framework, a collection of myths, traditions, symbols, narratives, and value systems that idealizes and advocates, again, here's that word, a fusion of a particular expression of Christianity with American civic life. It's defined in these narrow terms that this is what it means to be a true Christian, to be a true American. And it says that this version of Christianity is the principal and undisputed cultural framework in the country, and that the government should be involved in vigorously preserving that framework. It also brings up the element, and he says that there's 4 elements that make this a threat. And I'm going to get these ones here for you now. He says, these are the ones, in looking across the board at Christian nationalism, he's come to these 4 empirical elements. So first, there's a desire for a society organized to traditional social arrangements. The ideal society is one where men lead and women support. Marriage is ideally heterosexual, and families with a mom and a dad are committed to procreation. American citizens and families that represent these ideals will have the easiest access to civil rights and liberties. Those who do not will be denied easy access. Number 2 is a comfort with authoritarian social control. The world is viewed as chaotic, and we need strong leaders through the threat of violence or actual violence defend the preferred social arrangements and hierarchies. We're going to talk a little bit later about an aspect of Lutheran theology that helps us understand this. The contrast between the theology of glory and the theology of the cross. American Christian nationalism is a theology of glory, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Number 3, a desire for strong ethno-racial boundaries around national identity, civic participation, and social belonging. That the real American is a natural-born Anglo-Protestant. It is this group who created the United States. It's this group who should remain central to cultural identity and political leadership. That leaders look a certain way. They're from a certain place, and they always will be. That's Christian nationalism. Finally, number 4, a populist impulse that creates space for Americans to embrace feelings of victimization, that there's always elites trying to persecute them. Now, this can take darker turns, as we've seen in some conspiracy theories that lead to some very dark places. One example, like he lists, is thinking that Christians in America are always being silenced or persecuted. Let's take a look, though, at what he also mapped, some interesting ideas. So one response to even talking about Christian nationalism sometimes is that Christian nationalism is not even a real thing. It's just a smear that certain groups use to keep Christians out of politics, to keep Christians from talking about their views. But what's interesting is they did a survey and found that the people, this is kind of a hard one to read, but let me explain it real quick. The people that are most likely to believe that Christian nationalism is a term invented by the left to smear Christians are the most likely to believe strongly that Christian nationalism is the only idea that will save this fallen nation. Interesting, right? It doesn't exist, but it's the most important thing for our country to thrive. It's interesting, but we don't always hold beliefs that make sense when you say them out loud like that. Interesting survey. Another one is, where is Christian nationalism? So this is a population density, or where it's adhered to, 60% to 0, greens lightly, dark blue heavily. You see Wisconsin is fairly light. Christian nationalism, it's not to say it's not present here. I'm talking with the woman, the pastor who's going to be with us in November from Wisconsin Council of Churches. It's very much something she encounters in her work at the Capitol as a member there, speaking on behalf of the Wisconsin Council of Churches. But not as prevalent as some other areas, but you might think, okay, Lutheranism, it's more a deep South Bible Belt thing, but take a look at North Dakota. Outside of Minnesota, North Dakota is where you can find the most Lutherans per capita, and it is strongly embraced there. So to recognize that even though we might think ELCA Lutheranism is monolithic, we have a certain picture of what it means to be Lutheran sometimes in joking fashion, but it looks different in different places, and how it translates and how Christian nationalism may or may not present itself in the church may not be exactly how it looks in Madison, Wisconsin. So again, just those 2 common responses, going back to that survey question a little bit. This is, again, from Andrew Whitehead's research. The one response is that it doesn't exist, that Christian nationalism doesn't exist, it's just a made-up term from those who want to keep religious Americans from bringing their faith into the public sphere. Or the other common response, it exists, but it's not a big deal. Why are you making a big deal out of this? Christian nationalism, I'm by that definition, I might call myself a Christian nationalism, but all Christian nationalism means is I want to bring my faith into the public sphere. It doesn't seem so objectionable when put in a certain way. And I want to give a couple of voices who might fall in that camp, just so you can hear, again, how some people are reacting to this outside of maybe some of the other voices we've heard so far this morning.
There's a huge, you use the phrase Christian nationalism, which is, I hate this term, but a hot button phrase.
Yep.
But never really defined. So people
That's right.
can impute whatever meaning they want
Exactly.
to. And the meanings differ greatly. So if by Christian nationalism you mean you try to make it a more Christian country, that's
Yep.
what you just advocated for.
Right.
If it means put a religious leader in charge of the country and make a state religion, That's an entirely different meaning, which you oppose.
So again, that's part of a larger conversation, but that's one example of how other people are looking at it. Here's another view. This is from a pastor from an evangelical denomination. We'll take a look at their take on it. This was back around the election.
Christian nationalism, what is it, and why are we being accused as Christians of being Christian nationalists? Well, listen, if it just simply meant that you love God and country, I'll take that label any day. But unfortunately, some people are using it as a disparaging label because they want us to be silent. You know, think about this. They think that Christians are wanting the United States to be a theocracy. I have no illusions, and most Christians I know don't have any illusions. We will not be a theocracy until Jesus Christ comes again and then rules and reigns over the whole earth. But in the meantime, they're accusing us because they don't want our values to be inserted into our culture. Let me tell you something. There are thousands of lobbyists and thousands of donors who want their interests represented in government. Why shouldn't Christians have their interests represented in government? So vote your values. Who cares what they label us? Live for Christ and make him known.
I think it's interesting to hear some of these voices because, one, Sunday is one of the most divided times in America. We don't go to other churches that are different than ours. We don't often converse with Christians who maybe have a different take than us. But two, it's very easy to hurl labels from across the other side to define an entire broad swath of a group of people, right? Words that can wrap up everybody, but maybe don't define even a thin slice of it. But it's easier to dismiss, right? We could say evangelical. And for some in the room, that might carry certain meanings. It also might be, that's a group I don't have to talk to, don't have to think about, don't have to deal with. Conversely, there's plenty of words hurled the other way. You are a progressive who doesn't think this or that. I don't need to engage with you because you are so far off the deep end. And so we stay over here, and we stay over here, and we have our assumptions and presumptions about what this side believes, what they think. Not just what they believe and what they think, but who they are. And it's easy to just completely disengage. But that's not a way forward for the church. I don't think it's a way forward for our country either.
Christian nationalism.
Let's go back though. Here's one more video definition for us to consider. This is going to feature Andrew Whitehead at the end here.
And he is actually one of the leading scholars of Christian nationalism in America, if not the world. And he's here today to help us better understand this weird thing called Christian nationalism. So maybe we can start there, just define some terms. Like what is Christian nationalism? And then maybe if you could kind of help us better understand, like, how do we know, if something is, or should have the label Christian nationalism, and how people know if they are Christian nationalists.
And so the way we define it is a desire to see a very particular expression of Christianity fused with American civic life, and wanting to see the government at all levels vigorously defend and preserve this particular expression of Christianity as central to our policies, our national identity, and things like that. And so what's important about that definition is it points to a very particular expression of Christianity. Because as we know, there are a lot of expressions of Christianity that operate here in the U.S. But when social scientists or folks are analyzing and writing about Christian nationalism, it really is a desire to see this one particular type of Christianity privilege. And the way that I like to explain it is that this particular expression of Christianity does refer to some of the historic Orthodox Christian beliefs that we all kind of know about, right? That God in three forms, and Jesus was God's Son and came to earth and resurrection, some of those key things. And it does refer to that. But this particular expression of Christianity also brings with it what I like to call extra cultural baggage, right? So it isn't just about saying Jesus is Lord, but it also brings with it these other cultural views that we see are particular to this expression of Christianity, and in many ways particular to the fact that it kind of flourished here in the U.S. So I'll just list out these kind of cultural markers, this cultural baggage.
And he is actually...
So now I kind of want to give you a chance to talk around the table and talk about some of this difficulty sometimes in pinning down definition, but also sometimes the challenge in that some of these things taken on their own we might not find so challenging or disagreeable, but maybe we will, but that's what we want to talk about. So remembering our acronym that we had at the start of our meeting today for engaging in conversation, I wanted you to talk around the table for a little bit. Of these 4 things, these were questions on a survey in 2007. This came from Ryan Burge, kind of the church data expert. These were survey questions in 2007 that generally kind of could have been used to measure adherence or belief in Christian nationalism. But I want you to talk around your table. Of these 6 questions or statements, which one is the easiest for you to dismiss as just, I can't see that? Which one is the maybe one that you're most sympathetic to, or one that's hardest to say, yeah, I can't really maybe set that one aside. There's a hint of truth there. Maybe there's none, maybe it's all of them. I don't want to presume anything, but I want you to have some conversation about these 6 traits. Take a look and just talk about around your table which one, again, on both ends of the spectrum, you feel today. Take a moment. Thank you. All right, I have to end the bonus time now, and if there's more conversation, I've got good news. We're going to be gathering again in November, so there'll be ample time for more conversation. But these questions, adherence to these 6, statements was measured in 2007, but it was again taken in 2021. And Ryan Burge, again, he's kind of the foremost church stats data guy right now in the country. He, when asked about Christian nationalism last year, came to this conclusion based on the study. He said, I think it's empirically defensible to say that Christian nationalism has declined significantly since 2007. That might be a surprising statement. I see some faces and some sounds of surprise, right? It's interesting because, again, we're talking about this now, and we see it in a lot of places. I think we see it because it's very close to the seats of power, and it's also very much on our news and everywhere. But if we take, again, this is one marker. There's a lot of definitions, a lot of slices that get at what it is. But by this measure, by this survey, he found that responses to these questions, for instance, in 2007, only 19% strongly disagreed that the federal government should advocate Christian values. But by 2021, 33% of respondents strongly disagreed with that sentiment. The federal government should enforce strict separation of church and state. 40% strongly agreed in 2021 compared to 25% in 2007. So these are pretty significant changes over time. He's a fantastic read, so I recommend Ryan Burge because he has a whole other studies about things, about people's perceptions and what's reality. That when you ask somebody, what's the breakdown of religious groups in the United States, and different people surveyed thought that, the Muslims make up like maybe a quarter of the nation when it's like closer to like 1 or 2%, but that has implications about people, like there's an increase and rise in religious diversity, and people ascribe fears or different things to that, but it's not reality. And so sometimes Ryan Burge comes at these questions with just, here's the numbers. I'm not going to make too many statements about what it means, but just here's the numbers. Again, one perception, one opinion, but I think it's an interesting one, and it's backed up a little bit by a professor from Duke University who actually, his background is in worship. And so he does the history of worship, study of worship, but he comes at the question of Christian nationalism through how we worship. What makes up our worship, what our songs, what shapes our worship. And he has been leading a class on Christian nationalism for the last few years. And his sense, his take on the landscape is that Christian nationalism is like a tide. He believes we are in a high tide phase now, so it is maybe more prevalent perhaps. But the moon moves and the tide will eventually wane. That this is not something that's going to be the dominant force forever. Similarly, Reverend Angela Denker, she was a writer for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune and is an author and pastor now. She had this take on Christian nationalism. She said, Christian nationalism is a version of the idolatrous theology of glory, which replaces the genuine worship of God with worship of a particular vision of America, often rooted in a revisionist history. And this is where we come to that Reformation idea. Luther's really strong point that he was trying to make about the difference between a theology of glory and a theology of the cross. A theology of glory uses Jesus for something. The gifts of God for something. Power over. The power of a strong God over and against. The power of God to use for this purpose. The theology of the cross says we have nothing to offer. That the wounded God, the God who suffers, is the only God who can help. There's a version of America that wants the strong Jesus, the muscular Jesus, the one who's right with us, winning all the battles, defeating all the same people we don't like, and getting us to the place so that we finally have the power. But it's a vehicle to something. A theology of glory is a vehicle to something. A theology of the cross is a vehicle to the foot of the cross, where all our projects end. all of our attempts to use God to get something, to make something of ourselves, comes to an end. This is from Reverend Gerhard Ford. He's an ELCA pastor and theologian. He's no longer with us, but this was in one of his famous works on this concept. He said, "As sinners, we are like addicts, addicted to ourselves and our own projects. The theology of glory simply seeks to give these projects eternal legitimacy. The remedy for the theology of glory, therefore, cannot be encouragement and positive thinking, but rather the end of the addictive desire." Luther says it directly. The remedy for curing desire does not lie in satisfying it, but in extinguishing it. So we are back to the cross, the radical intervention, end of the life of the old and the beginning of the new. The theology of glory, he says, simply seeks to give those projects eternal legitimacy. And we hear that in Christian nationalism, that this is a divine mission to take America back for God, right? To restore what once was, so that we can have the power we're supposed to have, so that this nation can look like it's supposed to look, people can live like they're supposed to live. And there's just, as always, there's just a hint in that sounds right, that sounds good, that even maybe sounds just, that maybe, again, hearing and shining it in the right refraction of light we can believe in too. But this is when it goes sour, when we see what it really is. It's a theology of glory. That it's about using God to get something else, not to get God self. That's the difference. I want to go back a couple years, several years back now. Maybe you remember this, when these images were on your TV every night. Maybe, not every night, but you saw this posters and faces like this quite a bit. Does anybody know what church this is from? Yeah. That's right. Has anybody heard of the Westboro Baptist Church? Yeah, hands are going up. You've heard of the Westboro Baptist Church because they were on your TV screens because they made a point to travel to funerals, to speaking events, to everywhere, to give the impression that they were an incredibly large movement, that this was Christianity, that everybody believed that everybody was going to hell. Here's the long list, and it was, most people who weren't a part of maybe Christianity presumed that this was what large swaths of Christianity believed, that this was at the center of it. But let's look at the numbers. Westboro Baptist Church was one congregation made up of 70 members. But we're not from Kansas, but I saw hands go up that knew this church, right? That knew what it was about. It was 70 people. You are a part of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, a church of over 8,400 congregations, 2.7 million members. Do they know what we believe? Do they know what you believe? I'm not suggesting you make a large poster and go to Channel 3 tonight. But it's important to know what we believe, because it's so easy to say, those people are crazy, and dismiss that over there. But if it came time to it, it came time to define it, it came time to say, what do you believe? If you don't believe that, what do you believe? Are you ready for that conversation? Are you ready to have that conversation? Because the world needs it. The world does not need more of this. It needs the theology of the cross. The theology of glory needs to be shown for what it is. That the American dream, so often ascribed to that theology of glory, it doesn't lead to life, to flourishing. But there is a road that does. And we, as Lutheran Christians, have been entrusted with a faith of proclamation, of declaration. To declare what is. Not what you have to do to get there, a list of all these things, but what already is. Dr. Craig Nesson, he's from Wartburg Seminary. Shout out to Wartburg. He also is now coming back, okay, so what do we do? That's where I'm pivoting here to, all right? What do we do? And in some ways, you say, well, we'll stay over in the church and let everything outside in the world figure out. If people happen to find their way to the church, we'll talk to them about a different way of being. And part of that's true. We model a different life, a different community, a different way to be. The way we treat one another, the way this community operates is a beacon, is to be the model. We are, not theoretically, we are Christ's hands and feet. We are the body, and that is our job. But that also does not preclude us from being involved as people who live in this country, taking our faith and caring about what's happening in the world. So he says, instead of understanding the gospel of Jesus Christ as setting us free for serving neighbors through political engagement for justice and peace in the world, that's what he's advocating for, he says that a distortion of the two kingdoms theology of Luther limits Christian existence to what happens through church programs and activities. That there are firm lines drawn about what Christians should or shouldn't do. And again, this is a narrow path, as we talked about, right? About how just a little bit this way or that way, and this can start to resemble something or another. He says, though, instead of understanding separation of church and state as a constitutional protection from the imposition of religion by the state, a distortion of the Establishment Clause leads Christians to think Christian faith precludes political involvement. That's out there, and you heard it expressed from that pastor, whether it's true or not, that sometimes this is used. People say that anybody talking about their Christian faith in public, and maybe you've seen this, that you are a total out there lunatic if you are a Christian talking about your faith as it relates to politics. That it goes off the deep end to the most maximalist take, and you must be this, this, and this if you are a Christian who's trying to be engaged in politics. We know that's not true, but that's not what everybody believes. There was we have a bunch of declarations and confessions in the Lutheran Church, but other churches have some that have been written in more recent history. And the Barmen Declaration was one that was written by the German churches in the face of Nazi Germany. And that Article 3 of that document gives us another thing to consider as we think about this interplay of church and politics. It says, the Christian church is the congregation of the brethren in which Jesus Christ acts presently as the Lord in word and sacrament through the Holy Spirit. As a church of pardoned sinners, it has to testify in the midst of a sinful world. That's my emphasis there, but it has to testify in the midst of a sinful world with its faith as its obedience, with its message as with its order, that it is solely his property, and that it lives and wants to live solely from his comfort, and from his direction and the expectation of his appearance. It says, then we reject the false doctrine, as though the church were permitted to abandon the form of its message and order to its own pleasure, or to changes in prevailing ideological and political convictions. In other words, to say the church needs to be the church, whoever is in office, whatever is happening out there, whatever the next election holds. We need to be the church, now and always. Another quote from Dr. Craig Nesson. It's a beautiful photo. I love that one. According to the Bible, Christians fulfill their political responsibility not only by rendering obedience to just government, but also by resisting oppressive government. History is replete with instances where Christians were obligated to hold the governing authorities accountable, not only to render obedience as guided by ethical criteria of what makes for the common good of all. We're going to talk in that next meeting when we have our friend from the Wisconsin Council of Churches about what it means to be involved in speaking out against Christian nationalism. That's not going to be today's topic, but there's a lot to talk about, so coming in November we'll talk about that. But Thanksgiving is coming up. And there's going to be some Thanksgiving tables that this is a topic that's difficult. Not just difficult, but extremely difficult. And I wanted to talk about one more element before we close today. This comes from Galatians chapter 6. Brothers and sisters, if someone is overtaken in any wrongdoing, you who are spiritual, restore such a person with a gentle spirit, watching out for yourselves so that you also won't be tempted. Carry one another's burdens. In this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. There's an organization called Disarming Leviathan. And they come at the conversation of Christian nationalism. They come from the evangelical world, so they're a little more closer to proximity, perhaps, to some of the places where this is most strongly held. But they come from a place of empathy and understanding, trying to get at what is it that is going on in the soul of the person that wants to embrace this theology, this ideology, and not to write off the whole person, not to close the door, but to stay engaged. And so this is what they work to do, to provide a deeper understanding of the modern American Christian nationalist movements and their relationship to American evangelicalism, discover why so many people are committed to it. They want to give people hospitable methods for engaging with American Christian nationalists, and also foster empathy and solidarity, importantly, when possible, right? For those committed to American Christian nationalism. And they want to encourage you to lead with, what's our month, our theme this month? Welcome and hospitality. They want to encourage you to lead with hospitality and to model the way of Jesus within your community. So there's a whole website you can check out. There was a book that the author wrote too about this topic, but that's for further conversation to think about. There's also, I'm going to pass out the slides, but there's a few books that have been written recently, and there's just more and more coming out to dive deeper into this topic. So I commend some of these to you. From Whitehead, he was one of the persons we talked about, and also Samuel Perry. This Baptizing America one was one that was recommended because this actually comes at it from the mainline perspective. How is the mainline church, not just the evangelical church, but the mainline church, in many ways complicit with some of the roots of American Christian nationalism taking place? So that's another one to check out. But again, I'll pass out the slides. This is an invitation to come next Sunday, November 16th, to the Verona campus after 10 a.m. worship. Not next Sunday, but Sunday, November 16th, when that hits, at Verona campus. And Reverend Brianna will be there with us from the Wisconsin Council of Churches. So look forward to that conversation. And then later on, next year, we're going to bring a movie to Good Shepherd, kind of in the spirit of what we just talked about reaching out across the divide. This is a documentary by the director of Won't You Be My Neighbor, if you saw that movie, about Mr. Rogers. And this is a movie that isn't in theaters, but is coming to churches and other organizations for special screenings, and we're going to have an opportunity to do a Zoom Q&A with the director. But I wanted to show you the trailer, and then we'll wrap up with some Q&A.
Problems are so big right now that we felt like we needed to do something. So we brought 12 pastors together from different theological, racial, ethnic, and political persuasions to see if they could find reconciliation in the middle of these polarized times.
We're being taught to hate each other.
The whole plethora of issues:
Gun control,
immigration,
Race, gender,
class,
abortion,
racism.
I would officiate a same-sex marriage.
There are times that the Spirit has to disrupt our patterns of living.
Why can't we be who we are and that be okay to the next person? Why aren't we trying to make everybody believe and feel the same way?
Seeing the responses to that was a lot more painful than I expected.
I think people love and respect you more when you let them know you're human.
The fact that we disagree is not insurmountable.
You be who you are, I'll be who I am, and we'll find a way through together.
Amen. Preach, preacher.
I was holding this thing together out of a fear of institution failing, not for love of my children.
I think being in a relationship with these 11 people has changed me.
What would it mean if all of the polarization, fragmentation, and conflict were actually this amazing opportunity for the gospel?
It's a story about love. Can people actually love each other? Beyond tolerance.
That's a holy thing.
Definitely looking forward to that coming up in January. More details to come. But before we closed our time today, I did want to have time for questions since we didn't yet have time for questions. And again, I can't say that I'm an expert on these and I won't be able to necessarily answer the questions. As we've seen, some of these definitions are a bit hard to nail down. But as best as possible, if there are any questions for conversation in the group before we go, I wanted to at least give an opportunity. Yeah, here we go.
I don't have a question, I just have a compliment.
Yep.
I'm so glad we are addressing this.
Yeah, the genesis of this, Pastor Craig, when we had an author that came to speak at Bethel downtown, Christian Nationalism, who wrote a book called Jesus and John Wayne, and then as part of that there was a follow-up seminar for pastors. And a presentation was given, which is actually a version of the presentation that Reverend Brianna is going to give when she comes in November. But that was something that Pastor Craig was a part of and said, now is the right time to talk about this. So in my new role that started this year as Faith Formation Coordinator, we're looking for more opportunities like this for post Sunday worship conversations, and this is really encouraging to see. Thank you for being here. But if this is something that really fits, we'd love to do this more often, to have opportunities right after worship for everybody to come and talk about the things that are most important in our community, in our church, in our world right now. So, thank you. Yeah.
Could we have Ryan Bird back? Because I tell you, that was like life-changing.
Yeah.
I mean, I get his emails now
Yeah.
every day, and I just think for the people who weren't here the first time he came, I think it could be.
Yeah. I'm guessing he's a lot harder to get now. He's a professor at Washington University now, which is great, and he's definitely, again, and when this comes up, you'll see him on New York Times, CNN, he's everywhere, but it's not impossible to reach out and ask, so thanks for that. That's something to consider. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, Pastor Dara.
Thank you so much, Eric. This was really a great presentation, and thank you all for taking the time. I just wanted to share a story about how this is close to home for us. So every year we do have the Thanksgiving meal, which is coming right on up. And in 2021, we had a huge turnout because we were doing to-go meals. Who doesn't love a Thanksgiving to go, right? And we had people of all different political persuasions come through our line, and the reason we know that is because sometimes they had some interesting political flags on their cars. And so one in particular had some disparaging words for President Biden that were not appropriate for a church setting. I cannot even repeat them in this room. But I had some volunteers come up and say, okay, but like, Pastor Dare, what do we do? Because they were in line for a long time. And I said, we're gonna feed them. And that's what we do here at Good Shepherd, right? We feed them anyway, and we offer that grace. And so I just wanna say, like, it's not far away from us. It's here in this community, and we have this opportunity to respond with grace and love, even if that feels like a really, really hard thing to do. And so I also want to extend one more invitation. That video was such a great example of the ecumenical work that is being done here in Madison. I don't know if everyone knows this, but Madison is a community where churches are gathering together very actively through the Collaboration Project, which you've probably heard that organization brought up many times. Our former youth director, Becca Feldhacker, she works for them, and she is part of this organization that brings churches together. And we are a part of that. We do things with them. So whenever you see that Collaboration Project, this is the kind of work we're doing. And it's not because all the churches agree on everything and like everything that each other does. It's because we believe that Christian unity is possible, and that even though it's hard, that the gospel can bring us together and unite us. One of the upcoming projects is an ecumenical Thanksgiving service. Show up. It's at Queen of Peace, the Monday of Thanksgiving week. I don't know what number day that is, but the Monday of Thanksgiving week. And it's over at Queen of Peace Catholic Church. Yep, we're going to go to a Catholic church and we're going to worship together. Because you know what we can all do together? We can give thanks to God. That's what we can do together. And that's what we're going to do. So please come. There's fellowship afterwards. We will be helping with that fellowship time. There's opportunities to volunteer. I know that there's going to be more conversation. I know Reverend Brianna personally. She's fantastic. She'll have wonderful actions for us to take. But just know in the meantime, we're doing this work together. And it's because of you all, it's because of us together, right? This priesthood of all believers. What a great day to celebrate this. So thank you. Know that we are doing this together.
November 24th.
Thank you.
Opportunity for any last questions or comments? Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
I would like just to say that it is well organized, you're so articulate, I am very, very impressed with how this program went this morning.
Well, thanks for being here, and again, we're looking forward to gathering for more conversations like this at both our campuses. So bring a friend next time, and thank you. And as a way of blessing, you are the body of Christ. May the Spirit guide you in conversation. May there be an end to fear, an end to anger, and may you lead as people of peace, proclaiming the good news in word and deed everywhere you go. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.